anyone not familiar, this is something we do between 1 and 3 times a month, depending on how many people I can track down, to come and share local / larger history topics. So tonight we're very pleased to have Vic Vignola here to present on the Battle of Fair Oaks, which he is the historian of. In fact, his book, Contrast and Command, which the presentation is based off of tonight, won the Fletcher Pratt Award, last year, which is awarded by the Civil War Roundtable of New York. And in 2023, it was voted as one of the top 10 Civil War books by Independent Review of Civil War Historiography, and was a finalist for the Best Military History Book by the American Battlefield Trust. Vic has also written many magazine articles for American Civil War in North and South, and he conducts a lot of programs, tours, and at other places, and is a historian of the 124th New York Orange Blossoms Regiment, among other things. Vic?
Thank you very much. Thank you all for being here tonight. Just as a quick, to let you know something, my voice, I have a little tickle in my throat, and I'm 6 months removed from having throat cancer. So, if my voice sounds a little bit edgy, don't take personal offense to it. We'll get through it though, okay? So, this is me, believe it or not, in my book, which is, as Brian was just saying, it has a lot of notoriety, but what I'm most proud of is that the study for this book resulted in the purchase of 12 acres of property on the Fair Oaks battlefield, which, what's significant about that? The battlefield is 6 square miles. Guess how much of it is preserved? You're looking at 12 acres. That in the National Cemetery, which is on the intersection of a road that we'll talk about in a little bit. So this is significant when you talk about preserved hallowed ground. So if you don't donate to the American Trust, I encourage you to, because this is what can come of it. So this 12 acres you see here, you'll hear the story about a lot of what occurred there, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight. Now, as far as the Battle of Seven Pines, Fair Oaks goes, most people are aware of one thing. This is where Joseph Johnston was wounded, and then Robert E. Lee was promoted in command. And for everybody, that's where the Civil War starts. Well, guess what? There's a lot more to that story. But it turns out this was Edwin Vaugh's Bull Sumner's most glorious day as a Union commander. He would be super effective, as you will soon find out. So let's talk about Seven Pines or Fair Oaks. I was talking to this young lady a little while ago. This battle has 2 names, Seven Pines and Fair Oaks. And according to what Johnston says, the Battle of Seven Pines or Fair Oaks, as Northern people prefer to call it, no action of warfare has so been little understood as that of Seven Pines. Well, guess who's responsible for that? Him. He made sure that people didn't know about it because him and James Longstreet performed terribly, and they wanted to bury the story, and pretty much they did. Now, as far as Bull Sumner goes, he was testifying before Congress, and a panelist said to him, "General, the Battle of Fair Oaks and Seven Pines, they're the same battle as I understand." And Sumner bristled at that. He said, "Oh no, sir. There are 2 different distinct places. The battle which I commanded on Saturday and Sunday was at Fair Oaks. The Battle of Seven Pines was a separate battle, and General Heintzelman, who's buried in Buffalo, that's who commanded there." Well, Sumner's wrong. It was the same battle, but it had a Seven Pines sector and it had a Fair Oaks sector, separate and distinct from each other, as you will soon find out. So where did this battle occur? Well, here's the Confederate capital. Whoops, go back. Watch out, I'm dangerous with these remotes. Okay, here's the Confederate capital of Richmond right here, and here's the Chickahominy River flowing diagonally across it. The main part of our story tonight as we move forward. Now, the campaign for the peninsula, McClellan Lance's army puts Yorktown in siege. Then there's the Battle of Williamsburg on May the 5th. Shortly thereafter, Johnston retreats with his soldiers into this area, then realizes the military position is no longer feasible for him to remain there, so he takes his entire army across the Chickahominy River on May the 18th. May the 20th, McClellan begins crossing here at Bottoms Bridge with the 4th Corps, and he has them move out to 7 Pines, which is at the intersection of the Williamsburg Road and the 9 Mile Road, and that's where they position themselves. So that by May the 30th, this is what the map looks like. Now, I'll break this down for you. The McClellan had 5 corps, the 5th Corps under Fitzjohn Porter, 6th Corps under William Franklin, but down here, Erasmus Keyes' 4th Corps. He has 2 divisions, Silas Casey and Darius Couch. Silas Casey's division had 13 regiments, 8 of which were brand spanking new. In the early part of March, they arrived in Washington, D.C. They hadn't been trained yet, and this includes the 100th in New York, by the way. They hadn't been trained yet, they hadn't been disciplined, they hadn't had their officers evaluated, yet here they are at the tip of the spear. They were the least likely men you'd want to have there, but that's where McClellan put the 4th Corps. He had approximately, on this day, the May 30th, nearly 5,000 troops. He started out with 9,000. Nearly 4,000 have been either died or succumbed to illness, deserted, or left the service of the army. So this is not somebody you want to have out front. Darius Couch's division behind him, more experienced, but also only around 5,000 men. And then you notice there's a gap of a little bit over 2 miles from the 4th Corps to Samuel Heintzelman's 3rd Corps, Phil Kearny's division, and Joe Hooker's division. But look at that gap. It's awesome. And then here is the 2nd Corps of Bull Sumner. Why did McClellan leave 3 corps on one side of the river and 2 on this side of the river? It's because he was focusing on his right flank and not really much concerned about here. He didn't think Johnston was going to make an attack. Sumner had 3 jobs to do. One was to protect Porter and Franklin should they be attacked. The other was their supply depot up here at White House Landing. He was to protect that. And the third, should Keyes be attacked, Sumner was to support him. But on May the 25th, when he arrives here to Tyler Plantation, the only way to reach Keyes would have been to come down with both of his divisions to the Williamsburg Road and out along the Williamsburg Road. That wasn't good for Sumner, so he orders 2 colonels to come to his headquarters, and he tells the men, gentlemen, you're going to build me bridges across this river so that when I need to, I can cross my corps to get over there, and I'll cut this distance down to a little bit over 2 miles. So that was the plan. So the next day, you've probably seen this picture, Library of Congress. It's the famous Grapevine Bridge. And what's unique about the construction of this was that Edward Cross of the 5th New Hampshire, he had his men, they had been building bridges and corduroy roads. But when they cut down the trees, he had them cut down the trees so that the stumps were of equal height, so that they could serve as piers. When they did the decking that went across it, they would serve as piers. And what you see here actually, everybody calls it, if I told you the Grapevine Bridge is 1,200 feet long, you'd say, oh my God. Well, I'd be lying, because it wasn't 1,200 feet long, it was 100 feet long. But it was 1,100 feet of a corduroy road and a causeway, you see? So it lifted it up off the swamp, because the swamp area was that extensive, but the actual river itself was maybe 100 feet wide at its most at 3 points. So they built the bridge, and as you can see, not a pin, dowel, bolt, or nail into its construction. The men used grapevines to tie it together, and it gave flexibility, as we will discuss later how important that is. Now, on the Confederate side, Johnston had an army of 55,000 men, but Robert E. Lee, who was then an assistant to Jefferson Davis at the time, had brought together 35,000 more reinforcements to the area. So now what you see pictured on this map is about 75,000 Confederates. And Johnston makes a determination that he's not going to sit here and wait for McClellan McClellan to put him under siege again, so he makes an idea, I want to make an attack. These guys look vulnerable, but I need to find out more. So he summons D.H. Hill to his headquarters and he tells Hill, I want you to make probes along this road and find out Keyes' strength and let me know if he's vulnerable. So on May the 29th, May the 30th, Hill does a strong probe of these lines and informs Johnston that the 4th Corps is vulnerable. They can be attacked. Johnston then decides, I'm going to make an attack, but he no longer trusts his second-in-command, G.W. Smith, to make the attack. He has now got all his faith in Longstreet. He tells Longstreet, come to my headquarters, we're going to make a plan for attack. And here it is. Longstreet will move his 6 brigades east along the 9-mile road here to Old Tavern. That'll place 13,800 men squarely on the right flank of Keyes' 4th Corps. Benjamin Huger will take his 6,500 men and swing them down to Charles City Road, where it says Rhodes, and that'll place 6,500 men on the left flank of the 4th Corps. Once Huger arrives here, Robert Rhodes will take his brigade, join Daniel Harvey Hill. It'll now put him at 10,500 men. The attack will start as soon as Rhodes arrives around 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning. So front and flank, 25,000 Confederates will be attacking a little bit over 10,000 Federal troops. And after they destroy them, they'll then move on to taking on the 3rd Corps and take care of both corps before the day is done. Simple plan, but there's problems. First one is Johnston and Longstreet, as they're crafting the plan, Johnston sees Longstreet taking notes, and Johnston makes a huge fatal error. He decides it's not necessary to give written orders to Longstreet. Huge mistake. He was counting on Longstreet to know what the boss was talking about. Second big event was that a rainstorm struck the area. It is not just any rainstorm that struck the area. It is one that is described thusly. They said the rain fell as though it was a flood from the sky. Another account said the rain fell in biblical proportions. And what happened to my screen? Oh my God.
Rainstorm.
Well, the rain got it.
Yeah.
Okay. But at any rate, it's back because you know what? It's a stress test to see if I know what I'm talking about. Okay. So we're back live. So at any rate, the rain's falling. E.P. Alexander, that famous Confederate artillerist, he would later say that the storm of May the 30th and May 31st was the most violent rainstorm he experienced in the entire Civil War. That's the rain that fell. And since it had rained 4 of the 7 previous days, the entire area was flooded. The Chickahominy River was flooded, all the roads, all the fields, everything was a flood. But on the early morning hours of May the 31st, nonetheless, the rain stops, and the Confederates start moving to their positions to mount their attack. But what happens? Well, in the morning, Johnston's expecting to hear the sounds of fighting. But at 9 o'clock, he's not hearing any sounds of fighting. He's hearing sounds of confusion. The Confederate attack plan is all messed up. Why? Because Longstreet says he misunderstood his orders. Rather than move east along the 9-mile road to Old Tavern, he went south towards the Williamsburg Road. And in doing so, he cuts off Benjamin Huger. Remember, it's Huger that's got to get here so the attack can start. He cuts off Huger here at Gillies Creek. There's a traffic jam. 2 divisions, 20,000 men, all want to get across. And Longstreet says, my men were here first, so we're crossing. And he does. He delays Huger by 4 hours. Nonetheless, when he finally gets across, Hill realizes the attack is in danger of happening. He sends a rider down to Rhodes and tells Rhodes, you get up here, and as soon as you do, we're starting the attack. And by 1 o'clock in the afternoon, that's precisely what happens. This, my friends, is the fighting in the Seven Pines sector. It is about to begin. And it happens along the Williamsburg Road. And what Hill is doing is taking his 4 brigades, crushing them into Casey's division here in this position. The combination of them being inexperienced, the ground is wet and soggy, There's trees laying all over the place. There's abatis. Plus, these guys are firing guns and 22 artillery pieces at these guys that are rushing them. So there's a heck of a fight going on. So with all this going on, Hill has to commit his 4th Brigade, and in doing so, he doesn't have any reserve troops. And he receives word that the right flank of Casey's division is vulnerable. So Hill sends back word to Longstreet, send me a brigade so I can probe this. And so coming forth is a brigade. Part of it, Hill breaks up and puts them into the center to continue the push here. The other part of it is commanded by a young 26-year-old South Carolinian by the name of Micah Jenkins, a graduate of the Citadel. And Hill meets with Jenkins and tells him, I want you to take your men, 1,300 men, to this right flank and probe through and get behind the enemy, cut him off at this 9-mile road, get into their rear, that'll unhinge this front, and we'll be able to drive them off. At the same time that Hill and Jenkins are meeting here, Couch and Keyes are meeting over here. They recognize the same vulnerability. So Keyes orders Couch to take these 2 regiments, put them in there, and plug that hole before the Confederates can exploit it. And it's a head-on collision, because guess what? Jenkins is arriving with his men as these guys are rushing forward, and a 25-minute brawl in those woods. The 61st Pennsylvania brought 557 men into line. 260 of them will be casualties in 20 minutes. Every line officer, down to the most senior captain, is either killed, wounded, or captured in 20 minutes. That's the devastation of what Jenkins' men did. Further, Jenkins drives through and gets to that Williamsburg Road at the same time that Robert Rhodes is breaking this part of the line. The Confederates are winning this battle major at this time as they're breaking through. And it's at this time that really the Confederates had an opportunity of victory. And it's when, at this point, that Keyes would later write, my right was on ground so favorable to the approach of the enemy and so far from the Chickahominy that if Johnston had then attacked, I could have made a feeble defense and every man of us would have been killed, captured, or driven into the swamp before any assistance could have reached us. And you don't believe me? Just look at this map. Oh my God, can you imagine had another force? This is where Longstreet should have been. Can you imagine 13,000 men coming down this road as they should have been earlier? They would have destroyed them. This was a huge lost opportunity. You talk about what ifs in a Civil War. This is a major what if. But what actually happens? Couch falls back with some of the stragglers that survived this brawling in here. He falls back to the railroad depot at Fair Oaks Station. And when he falls back there, he sees 4 regiments, 4 artillery pieces, 1,700 men, and every one of these men that's here knows they're cut off. They can tell from the sounds of fighting, it's going behind them and to their left. They know they're in trouble. They also know, for some reason, this force has not come down the road, but they must soon be coming. So Couch, thinking fast, he says to a young captain, William Van Ness, he tells Van Ness, I want you to ride for your life to these bridges and find out if Sumner has crossed. And if he has crossed, tell him to get over here. I need him. So let's go over and talk about Sumner for a second. Sumner, at 1 o'clock, when the fighting starts down here, he's having lunch with Sedgwick and Richardson. And as their lunch begins, they hear the sounds of fighting. And it is said, as the sounds of fighting grew louder and louder, you could hear it go from, you could sense in Sumner, it went from his ears directly to his heart, and he immediately ordered Sedgwick and Richardson, form your divisions, but don't form them at the ready at their camps. Have them meet at their bridgeheads and await my orders to cross. And that saves well over an hour worth of time, and it's huge as the story develops. So now here at the Grapevine Bridge, which we told you about earlier, there standing is Willis Gorman's brigade, led by the famous 1st Minnesota Regiment. 1st Minnesota young men,
privates standing on the edge of a flooded river, and they're looking across 1,200-foot long causeway bridge, whatever you want to call it, and it's bouncing up and down and moving back and forth. And the order comes, cross it. And they did. And as they started going across it, using those piers with that flexibility from the grapevine, actually the flooded waters lifted the causeway up. And as the men started walking across, they pushed it down on those piers, and they were able to get across. And then it gets better. The artillery starts to cross that bridge. And when they get across to the other side, because all those men, those thousands of men, there I did it again. So we'll get it back in a second. Oh, sure. I'll make up the story from here, and you guys will have to believe every word I say. So let's see. You know what I'll do? I don't know what happened. How did this thing go? Ryan? It's moments like these that always stress presenters. And I usually blame it on my second oldest son. But he's not here. So if I say that dang Zach, I know my wife will tell him and I'll be in trouble. So I won't say anything about Zach. Okay, now you want me to move this forward? Here, these guys, this is the advanced class, so we're going to get up. Keep going. It froze. Whoops. Right. There we go. This is where I am. Okay, I promise if it happens again, that you can put me in detention. Okay, Sumner has the 1st Minnesota. When they cross, and all those men get across the mud, the men sink into the mud, but they get across. But when the horses go across, pulling those artillery pieces, they sink up to their girths in the mud. So what happens is the men seeing that, and Kirby, who's commanding those guns, unhitch the horses. They take prolonged ropes and tie them to the trails of the guns. Men stack their guns, got in the mud and the muck up to their chests. Men are turning the wheels and lifting the barrels of the guns, sliding those guns through the mud while other men are pulling them through. It's an amazing story. They pull all 6 guns through, all their caissons and everything. Think of it, the determination to get those guns through is amazing. And at the same time, then they start moving towards where they're supposed to go. At the same time, up here, Johnston has moved his headquarters to Old Tavern, and there's a division there under William Whiting. Now remember I told you it was Smith's division who was the second command, but Smith is present, but he has handed off Whiting command of the division. They're here, it's 11,200 men, and they are the very same sounds of fighting that carried so clearly over here to Sumner, believe it or not, 2.5 miles up. The very sounds of, same sounds of fighting, it was an acoustic shadow, they couldn't hear it. Not only could they not hear it, but Johnston really had no intentions of following up with any attack until 4:00 p.m. Word comes from Longstreet that the Yankees are vulnerable. Had he had reinforcements here, he could push the Yankees into the swamps before nightfall. Johnston says, let's move out. But he makes a tragic mistake. And think of what I just told you about them fishing those 6 guns out of the mud in the Chickahominy. He tells Whiting, the roads are a mess. The artillery will be difficult to move. Leave it behind. He leaves his artillery behind. When you think of the irony, it's astounding. But nonetheless, he starts moving out. Now you see these 4 dots here. Those 4 dots are from the 61st Pennsylvania. These 2 companies were very fortunate. They weren't in that mauling that Jenkins put on their brethren. They are commanded, anybody here a hockey fan, ever hear the name of Bobby Orr? Yeah. All right, not that Bobby Orr. This Robert Orr is a captain, okay? He is the senior captain in the 61st Pennsylvania, but he's also a good commander. He's going to earn the Medal of Honor April 2nd, 1865, at the breakthrough in Petersburg. So he's quite a young man. But he realizes, as the Confederates are moving out, he needs to get down here to tell Couch and General Abercrombie that they're soon going to have visitors.
Sure.
Couch and Abercrombie are in the meantime realizing we can't stay here, we can't defend this position, but this little Adams farm, there's a slight elevation in the road, a slight eminence. If we move our troops up to that slight eminence, we have a chance, because with our 4 artillery pieces, nobody can cross this road here, and maybe we can stall them long enough, and hopefully Sumner is going to come and we can do this. That's what the plan is, and then move on. This is my buddy Robert Orr right here, and there's Couch and Abercrombie. So this is what they moved to. It's a slight eminence, and this is part of the ground that's now preserved. Gary Edelman, the Battlefield Trust, has verified that this is the photo. This photo here, 250 acres, is what the Francis Adams farm was. This will eventually have Union troops lined up on it, but the artillery was lined up here, and it was lined up in this direction. Today, this is what that looks like. The very same position, half-mile away, is where the Fair Oaks Depot stood at the time. So, 3 things are going on in this slide simultaneously. We've got to put 3 things together. Johnston is moving down the road with Whiting's division, 11,200 men. Couch and Abercrombie are taking this position here at that slight eminence I just told you about. And Sumner and his men are arriving at the same time. Very dynamic situation. Think of that hour that Sumner saved. This is where it's coming crucial. At the lead of the Confederate advance, here the 6th North Carolina is commanded by a colonel by the name of William Dorsey Pender. And Pender is leading his men. And as they're coming across this road, also you have John Bell Hood and his Texas Brigade. Why are they moving this way and everybody else is still on this road? Because Johnston didn't know where Longstreet was. So he told Hood, you find where Longstreet's flank is, tell me where it is, and I'll bring the rest of the division there. Terrible recon, terrible staff work, huge mistake. 1,900 men are gone out of the fight. Nonetheless, here is Pender with his skirmishing regiment. Behind him is a Vanderbilt brigade. Johnston are riding with them. J. Johnston Pettigrew and his brigade. G.W. Smith does show up. Here's Wade Hampton and Robert Hatton's Tennesseans. They're moving down this road. As they're moving down this road, here is Couch and Abercrombie forming this position. Whiting notices that there's movement to his left and rear, and he's getting nervous that he's going to be flanked. So with that, and this field, Pender notices all this movement as well. He decides he's going to make an attack. As he's making his attack up here at the Adams house and you can't make this up. Hollywood couldn't write this any better. Who comes riding back but Captain William Van Ness? Van Ness comes riding up to Couch and says, General, Sumner has crossed the river and he will soon be here. And within 2 minutes of that announcement, Couch looks across the field and here's Sumner riding his horse, leading the 1st Minnesota and the rest of that brigade up the hill. They're running through the mud, carrying their guns, rushing to get there. Couch would later write, I knew then that God was with us and victory would soon be ours. Because now he knew he could defend the position, that he had plenty of men here to support his position. So that is when the actual attack begins. Pender forms his line of battle and moves in this direction. Vanderbilt, seeing Pender, he also forms his brigade and they make an attack. And their attack is on the position as it is forming for the Union troops. And this is what it looks like coming up that slight eminence. Pender's men would have been coming from the right and to the left. This area here would have had 4 artillery pieces, and as Kirby arrives with his 3 guns, at the time, first 3 guns, he's going to place them here. And then in this direction, Abercrombie will have his men. Law will be coming in this direction. They're focusing on the guns at the time. The fighting is going on, and it's pretty intense. And as the fighting is going on and it's pretty intense, Pender would write, the fire of the Yankee batteries was so unexpected and so severe that my right broke and it could not be rallied. And in a Confederate account, same time, from Law's Brigade says, the Yankees immediately opened a heavy and destructive fire on us from their artillery batteries, and we had no artillery with which to engage them. It was 10 guns against none. So you don't have to worry about any counter battery fire. You can just blaze away and have at it because you have nothing to worry about if you're an artillerist. That's heaven for them. So now, this is what happens. The Confederates fall back, and they're going to make a second attack. But now you're going to have Law's Brigade, Pettigrew's, most of his brigade, and Hampton and his brigade of Georgians, and one North Carolina regiment. This total is about 7,500 men who are now making this second advance. But before we get to the advance, you need to understand, and this is a key part of understanding the Fair Oaks portion of the battle, because that's what we're talking about now. That road had a double worm fence. You know what the worm fences look like? They're about 6 to 8 feet high, and it's all constructed of wood, and it zigzags through the field. Well, that's on both sides of the road, so that pens the Confederates in on the right-hand side, or the left-hand side of that road. Over here is a stream that snaked into the field. And it was when it put all the pieces together for the Confederate accounts that it started to make sense. Pettigrew's men talked about a swamp. On Hampton's side, one of the guys described it as a lagoon. Well, any lagoon I know means it's a pretty good sized body of water. And men in battle lines are not going to be able to march through it. So when you think about it, our column moved across a lagoon and along the edge of a dense wood. That's from 24-year-old Captain James Bell. And this stream is still there. It flows into a culvert that flows under a cul-de-sac of a large housing development. Okay? But there, this is a period map that shows you that very same stream coming right into the battlefield. So now the Confederate advance, as they're moving into this field, their advance is penned into a 350 to 400 yard at the most width, 7,500 men, no artillery support, compressed into a line of attack. And what are they facing? Well, when the 1st Minnesota arrives, they swing out into this area. Their colonel, Alfred Sully, realizes he can't be flanked because of the lagoon. So he takes 3 of his companies and faces them front, and takes 7 of his companies and faces them down so that they're providing enfilading gunfire into this area. Sumner, when he arrives, he detaches a section of 2 guns off to this side so he'll have artillery fire on both sides of his line. Abercrombie's men, they throw up as many logs and as much as they can to conceal themselves into this line. More of the guns as they arrive come in on this side, and then the 82nd New York and 34th New York, when they arrive, Sumner swings them down. So he's made himself, it's an inverted U basically, but it's also an inverted salient because all of the artillery fire is converging into the center. All of the gunfire is converging into the center. The Confederate gunfire can only be diverging out, but where everything on the Union side is firing in and down. Which side would you rather be on?
Yeah.
I think it's pretty obvious. Okay? So on the Confederate end, here's a couple of accounts. Christopher Columbus Cole. That's a name you can't make up. But honest to God, there was a guy who wrote this. Christopher Columbus Cole said, the enemy were in rifle pits, and their fire appeared to come up out of the ground, and it came in one continuous stream. It was a peal of thunder that lasted for more than an hour. You can imagine what those poor men were going through. Another from Hampton's Legion, up here when they're coming through. He says, the Yankees presented the appearance of a living wall of flame from the great number and rapidity of their discharges. And finally, B.F. Moody, he wrote to his wife on June the 2nd, 1862, I have hive bees, but they weren't nearly half as thick as the balls that flew past my head. So imagine what these men went through. It's during the second advance that Pettigrew is wounded. He's struck in his shoulder and a bullet comes out near his neck. He believes it struck his carotid and it didn't, obviously, because he survives. but he believes the wound is mortal and that he's going to die. His men can't remove him because of the gunfire and the artillery fire, so they leave him. He will be captured and taken to the Adams house, where we'll show you the photo later on. The house he's actually taken here for 2 nights to convalesce as a prisoner before he's sent across the river. But Pettigrew is wounded at this time. Others that are wounded at this time, Hampton gets shot in the ankle, Andrew Byrne on the Union side, and Alfred Sully. If you buy and read my book, you'll know why those guys' pictures are up there. Some of the quotes they make are the best. But now when we get back to the second advance, G.W. Smith, this is his division. He's back here, not engaged at all, but he can tell his division is being mauled, and he can tell there's no leadership up front. Somebody has to get up front to try to lead his men forward. So he decides that's what he's going to do, and what he does is he forms a third advance. In the third advance, he takes Hatton's Tennessee Brigade and the reserves that were present. He meets with Hampton in the edge of the wood, and they decide they're going to push like a wedge towards where the artillery is positioned here. If they can break through, that'll save the day, and they'll win the battle. But it's now getting dark as they're starting to make this movement forward. But as they're making the movement forward, one of the accounts says the condition of the air was such that the smoke of the battle settled so low over the field, we could only see the blaze of the guns and the flashes of their rifles. Another wrote, and this is telling with the rainfall that had occurred, the light of the evening was lurid from the blaze of the hostile guns. The multitudinous of messengers of death were thicker than raindrops in a tropical storm. And finally, in the artillery, one man wrote, a murderous fire of grape and canister and musketry opened upon us. I cannot pretend to describe it. Shot and shell mowed through our ranks. Well, in 2.5 hours, it was basically 9 guns because 1 gun broke after it fired 4 shells. In 2.5 hours, 9 guns fired 573 rounds. Do the math. It's like every minute, 3 guns were blazing away at only other men and trees where they could have winds raining on top of them. They had nothing to worry about. And on the Union side, a chaplain by the name of Edward Neal, he actually formed Macalester University in Minnesota, if you ever heard of it. He's sitting on his horse, and he's watching these artillerists blaze away, and he's so moved by it, he wrote, the rapidity and the loading and firing of Kirby's guns sounded like the incessant pounding of a giant steam boiler shop, and it excited the attention of all who witnessed it. You can just imagine what it was like to be 100 yards away from watching 9 guns just blazing away at will, as well as all the other gunfire being happening. Well, the Confederates will make an advance, and unfortunately for them, they're going to lose heavily. Many of their line officers, 9 colonels, will be either killed, wounded, or captured in this advance. So think of their losses. One of them is Champion Davis. He's killed during the advance. Gustavus Bell, he's mortally wounded. He's also captured, taken to the Adams house where he will die. His personal effects are removed, returned to his family. He's buried in a mass pit, and his body is never found, sadly for his family. Robert Hatton, he's advancing with his brigade, the Tennessee Brigade, riding along Gustavus Smith, and as they're riding through the woods, an artillery shell strikes Hatton's horse, killing it instantly, of course, falls on top of Hatton. He gets up, extricates himself. Smith says, "Are you okay, General?" "Yes, I am. Let's move forward." 2 steps later, gunshots strike him in the chest, killing him instantly. Bang, the Tennesseans are done. And oh, by the way, Smith was splattered with his blood. The only Union officer and line officer killed during this fight is John Riker. You ever hear Rikers Island in New York City? Well, his family owned that island, and it was a training center during the Civil War for federal troops. Well, it's at that apex of this attack that Sumner now realizes it's no longer feasible to stay on the defensive. He orders a counterattack across the fields. His men go hurling towards the Confederates, and as they do so, they drive them back. Here's a couple of accounts. One man who was a veteran of the federal disaster at Balls Bluff, which happened in October of '61. Remember, you had Bull Run, Balls Bluff in the east, and then this were the three fights in the east. You had Shiloh, of course, at Fort Donaldson prior to that, but in the east. And the Union Army in the east was 0 for 2. So Lyon said he was a loser in both of them. So now he's not too happy with being 0 for 2, but he says he's advancing forward on this bayonet charge. He says we advance forward with a bayonet, and it's a sign one will not be apt to forget in one's lifetime. We charged them in the mud that in places was a halfway deep. We felt a total disregard of our danger, but our feelings of revenge towards a foe committed me into being a demon. So you can imagine the intensity of these guys moving forward. Well, obviously, the Federals are going to drive the Confederates off, and another veteran of Balls Bluff, by the name of Henry Abbott, wrote to his parents on June the 5th, "You have no idea what a glorious feeling of victory brings. We were almost drunk with joy, and so hoarse from cheering that we could hardly speak." Now, remember, I opened this up by telling you, Johnston gets wounded in this battle, so Lee gets promoted. This is when Johnston gets wounded. Think of all the fighting we've talked about, okay? But yet this is the only thing people know about the battle. Johnston gets wounded. He gets wounded when an artillery shell explodes nearby him, and it does wound him quite severely. Gunshot wounds also strike him, but they're less severe. He won't come back to the Army until November of '62, but he is tended to by Robert E. Lee and Jefferson Davis. They help load him into the ambulance that's there, sending him off. Then they start moving up the 9 Mile Road towards Smith's position here, because Smith comes out of the woods after having to try to save the day here. He comes out, and what's the first thing he sees? Is Davis and Lee. And Davis says to him, "Johnston's down, you're in charge. What are you going to do about attacking tomorrow?" Isn't that a great way to know what's going on? So poor Smith is in charge, but he's really given a position that's impossible. So if you look at this, 2.5 hours of fighting on May 31st in this sector, okay, the losses are approximately, when you add them up, approximately 1,800 men on both sides, which is quite significant, including the fact that Johnston was also wounded. But when you really look at the impact of this, consider its contrast in command. As this young man, George Mindle, a Medal of Honor recipient from Williamsburg, had Johnston's plan been fully executed as to the time and places contemplated, the left wing of McClellan's army would have sustained irreparable disaster, and retreat of the whole army would have followed. Now, Stonewall Jackson, that's a name I know you've heard. He has just cleared the valley in Winchester. He's now at the doorstep of Washington, and he's outside of Harper's Ferry. Right now, Washington, D.C. is in turmoil because Jackson is nearby. Think of, had the news then struck them days later, that McClellan's army has suffered a massive defeat of nearly half of his army outside of Richmond. Instead of on to Richmond, we're getting out of Richmond. It would have been a disaster. And it would have been a great motivational boost for the Confederacy. And it would have been a big demotor for the motivator for the Union side. It's one of those what ifs. We'll never know. We can only speculate. But probably the best comment came from this man, E.P. Alexander, who said Johnston's effort to handle the army in battle had been an utter failure, and it was. So, as we move on, this is what the battlefield looked like in the evening of May 31st into June the 1st. Richardson's division comes forward, and look at what Sumner does here with his line. Look at this line. He has 26 artillery pieces right here at Fair Oaks Depot, defying anybody to attack him. And he's got a strong position all the way down the rail line that completely covers any attempt at a Confederate advance. But orders are orders. Smith has been ordered to make an attack by Jefferson Davis. But look at the impossibility of his decision. Now, we've all got feet, and we've all got our feet in a shoe right now, I assume. So make believe this is your toes, this is the bottom of your foot, and here's your ankle. And all across the top of your foot, where your tongue of your shoe is, that's Yankees. And that's Yankees on that steel boat toe of it. And there's artillery pieces here, and men dug in here. And you're told to attack, and that's precisely what they do the next morning. There's an advance. Louis Armistead and George Pickett will make an attack on the Second Corps. Is that ever going to happen again? Maybe it does at Gettysburg, right? The same two guys will make an attack at Gettysburg on the Second Corps. And they're just as unsuccessful here, more unsuccessful there. But Armistead's men are destroyed. So much so that soon Billy Mahone moves his brigade forward for the Confederates, and he forms a strong line. On the Union side, Oliver Otis Howard. Trivia question, anybody know what's wrong with this picture?
He's got both arms.
He's got both arms. You know why? I know this picture was taken before June the 1st, 1862, because at 10:30 in the morning on June the 1st, 1862, his right elbow stops a shot. At 5 p.m. on June the 1st, 1862, his right arm is amputated. Okay? So he leads his brigade into this area and down. And he will earn a Medal of Honor. I'm sure you know about his Medal of Honor from Gettysburg, but a lot of people don't know. He earned a Medal of Honor here for bravery at Seven Pines as well, leading his men forward. So nonetheless, the attack ends, and it's not successful for the Confederates. It ends by approximately 11 o'clock in the morning. And here's the casualties, the final tally of casualties. If you look at it, it was a disaster for them, for both sides. You have 11,168 casualties in total. So you've all heard of Shiloh, right? Shiloh, 23 hours of fighting, 23,000 casualties. Seven Pines Fair Oaks, 11 hours of fighting, 11,000 casualties. The casualty rate is exactly the same. But what do we know of Seven Pines? Johnston is wounded. It was an inconclusive battle. And the only thing that came out good of it was that Lee was promoted into command. But there was a lot more. Tell that to the 11,000 guys that were injured, that their battle was inconclusive and not important. I'm sure they would have a difference of opinion for it. So here's the Adams House. The Adams House that's there now is not the historic Adams House. And almost thank God for that. Here is the historic Adams House. When I tell you J. Johnston Pettigrew recuperated in one of these bedrooms upstairs here, this is where he was taken care of by a captain by the name of James Robinson. Joseph Robertson was a captain from the 82nd New York, not far from here. He took care of him up here. Downstairs here is where Oliver Otis Howard's arm was amputated, as well as thousands of other amputations occurred. This house eventually burned down in the early 1900s and was replaced by the house that's currently there. The trees that you see around it are significant in that it provided cover for the men who were living in that area at the time, recuperating from the wounds that protected them with the tarps that they set up from the rain and the sun and everything. So those trees are significant. There's depressions in the ground where most of these trees are, but there is one tree left, and that is the witness tree, and I verified that also with Gary Adelman. So we're almost at the very end. So this photo here, this is the modern house, and just ignore that, but realize this is where the historic house was located. Here is the witness tree. When Sumner arrived, he came up through a lane that was behind this area that came around the barn that was here at the time, and he came in this direction. At that time, Couch was in this area when he makes his comment, "I knew then that God was with us, and victory would soon be ours." His men formed. Kirby's guns will be in this area, firing this way. Abercrombie's line is across the road. The 82nd New York and 34th New York are going to form on this ridge line facing off to your left. The 20th Massachusetts and 7th Michigan, as they extend the flank, they will be walking right across the front of you. If you were standing here, you would have seen them walk right across the front of you. This is part of that 12 acres that's been preserved. This is definitely hallowed ground. So then we move on. This is a photo that I took because one of Kirby's accounts says that he was 90 yards from the front of the house. Now I know the house is built on the original foundation, it's just not the original house. This is 90 yards. Given the distances of the 9 artillery pieces, this is approximately where one of the artillery pieces would have been. Chaplain Edward Neal would have been on his horse somewhere over here, 90 yards away, watching those men boom away with their cannons. It must have been a hell of an inspiring sight to have seen. But at any rate, that was what we saw then. But to end this talk, and I thank you for your attention, I mentioned to you about Joseph Robinson, the fellow that took care of Joe Pettigrew, rather. He wrote to his father on June the 6th, when he finally got a break from all the amputations and doctoring he had to do. He got a hold of his dad and said, if the battle is grand and terrible beyond description, the field after it has been won presents the most awful sight I have ever witnessed. I never wanted to see a battle, but I must now confess that I never want to see another. And that, my friends, ends the show, and now we can take your question.
What's Savas BD?
That's the publisher.
Oh,
That's the publisher of the book.
thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions?
Well, what happened after this?
Yeah. Well,
We were looking at each other.
they, well, McClellan, he was not aggressive at all. McClellan had opportunities.
Really?
I know, what a shock, right? And he did something else even more shocking. He did a classic CYA. He blamed the fact that it was an inconclusive battle on Silas Casey's division. He sent a telegram to Stanton, because the only way of communicating, they didn't have cell phones, they didn't have radios, they didn't have anything. The only thing they had was a telegraph. And who had the only telegraph between the Army of the Potomac and Washington, D.C.? George B. McClellan. So he sends a telegraph to Stanton saying, our men have rallied themselves and come back. And it was looking terrible because Casey's men ran from the field disunitedly and just unpreparedly. And he goes, other than Casey's men, our men performed bravely today. The next day, it was in every newspaper in the North. So all everybody talked about was Silas Casey's poor guys, 100th New York, running from the field. And those poor guys, all they did was fight for 3.5 hours with no support.
Was this the same Silas Casey that wrote the manual?
Yes. Silas Casey, who, after this battle, would be relieved, but they thought so much of him that they appointed him to be the man who would train and evaluate all the white officers that would lead the colored troops, and that he would make sure all the colored troops were trained in a manner that all troops should be trained. So they still gave him a huge job, and they promoted him to Major General, and the date they gave him for his promotion was May 31st, 1862. So they recognized, we know you were shafted by McClellan, so when they gave him his promotion almost a year later, they backdated it to May 31st because he did perform wonderfully. He just got abused by McClellan's use of the telegraph. Good story. That's going to be in the next book.
So, we're standing there looking at each other. So where did the armies, where did they move after that? Where did they?
Oh, well, let me go back. Here, I'll give you some maps here. Well, what's going to happen?
You got two armies looking at each other right now.
Yes. So what happens is eventually, McClellan, now he leaves because Sumner has crossed. So you'll have the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th Corps placed on this part of the river below here. Eventually, the 6th Corps is going to fall back further. The 5th Corps is going to remain up here at Mechanicsville. Lee is going to make an attack called the Battle of Beaver Dam Creek or Ellison's Mill, whichever you prefer. He's going to cross his army to make an attack on Porter here on June the 26th, starting the 7 days campaign.
7 days.
And then that's going to move on down. You'll have the Battle of Gaines Mill, which happens here near New Cold Harbor, followed by Savage's Station. That causes McClellan to completely fall back. There will be Glendale, Frazier's Farm, whichever you prefer, Malvern Hill, and then he goes and sits at Harrison's Landing until early August, when Halleck and Lincoln finally have enough of it, and they relieve him from command and put John Pope in command.
So they gave up the south part of the river, or the creek, or whatever that is.
Right, it's a river, yeah.
Went on the north side, and because most of McClellan's army was down there, they crossed the river, they were on the wrong side.
Well, see, McClellan was greatly influenced from his experience in the Crimean War in the 1850s. He observed the siege of Sebastopol. So he was a firm believer that he would save lives by placing key positions, mightily, in siege. And he did it at Yorktown. He placed Yorktown in a siege for a month. And all it did was cost 10,000 men their lives while they were living in a swamp in those terrible conditions. So he credits himself from saving the men from not having combat deaths, but they had, terrible deaths otherwise. He was again looking to place Richmond in siege because he also didn't believe that Johnston was going to be aggressive to make an attack. Johnston, when you look at it, Johnston up until this part of the war had been brilliant in many respects. 3 times he had evaded Union generals right under their nose. The first one was in the valley before First Manassas. He completely moved Stonewall Jackson on railroad cars to Manassas in time to save the day. And then he moved the rest of his division there to help save it. Second time he did it was in March. He moved his army completely away, right under McClellan's nose. McClellan didn't know it for 2 days when he moved away in March from the same area up near Manassas. Third time was at Yorktown when he moved away again. And McClellan didn't know it for 2 days. He moved away 3 times to avoid any possible defeat. And then he retreated up the peninsula. So what's the message to McClellan? This guy's not going to fight me. Every time we put the pressure on him, he leaves. So he, in my opinion, is believing that I will just continue to put pressure on him, and when I get the First Corps down here from Fredericksburg under Irwin McDowell and place them here, I will have enough men that I can start putting pressure on him and place them under siege. But of course, Johnston didn't wait for it. Johnston saw the opportunity he had here and made the attack. And then later on, Lee is going to see the same opportunity and make an attack.
But on the other side of the river.
On the other side of the river, yeah. Because they knew that once McClellan began shifting, and it became obvious that McClellan was not going to be aggressive. The Confederates are pretty well, in my opinion, again, it's my opinion based on what I've researched, that McClellan was not going to be aggressive. He was going to use engineering, for lack of a better term, and very patiently try to place the Confederacy under siege. So Lee figured that out. And by Lee figuring that out, that's why the 7 days occurred. Because he knew I can't wait for him to put me under siege. They'll win. They got way more men, way more material. But if I strike them a heavy blow, we can drive them out of here. And it was a great plan he had. It's just that Jackson had his worst 7 days of his career during that campaign. Good stuff. Long answer, but it's too much to answer in 3 seconds or less. It's too much information here to get. Sorry.
What? Did they use Winchesters or muskets? And how did they keep the powder so dry?
Well, supply was a problem the entire time. They had Enfield rifles. Is primarily the rifle that was used at the time.
What kind of rifle?
Enfield.
With the cartridges?
Probably most of them had smoothbores.
No, the Confederates had a lot of smooth bores, but there was a British Enfield rifle at the time, and as well as the American rifles
It
were
was a
rifles.
little early in the war for that many men in the Army to have the modern
Modern guns,
modern
right.
Springfield.
Right.
I think that most of them had.
On our side, for sure, on Hill's attack, there were accounts of guys with smoothbores, but for the most part, they had by that time gotten rifles. They got rifle guns, rifles.
Rifle muskets.
Right, rifle muskets, yeah. And how they keep the powder dry, they had the cartridges, and it was a lot of hard work, yeah. So, but supply was a major issue for both sides. Illness and disease was a major issue for both sides during this time. So, other questions? You're all set. Make sure you if you want to grab a book, I'd be more than happy to sign it for you. Just make sure you pay Ryan, because I know he wants to have whatever he can, so that they recoup their inventory here. But, yeah. And if you have questions and you don't want to ask the group, I'd be more than glad to answer your questions.
All right, well, thank you again, Vic. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Yes, the books are up here. Just come and see me in the gift shop. Handle payment. A few upcoming events. Our next guest speaker will be June 11th. Stephen Krieger, who is a law professor at Hofstra University, will be in town to talk about his great-grandfather's murder here in Batavia in 1915. So it should be a very interesting recount of one of Batavia's crimes. And we have a concert on the 20th. Don Dwyer will be here doing songs and stories of the Erie Canal. And Java with Joe will be Russ Benson, who will be talking about his book, Amazing Skipper, which is about his time training dogs, but especially during Vietnam when he was a canine handler for the Air Force. So that's everything coming up in June. Hopefully we'll see you at some of it. If not, check out the website, check out Facebook, or just stop on by and we'll fill you in. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you.